I only have a few slides. I'm not the best visual presenter, and in fact I don't do an awful lot of lecturing, even though my title is lecturer, because as we know, there's so much more that you can do online than lecturing. But thank you so much for the invitation to address you today. Lucy informed me that your focus today is derived from your collective staff feedback in your 2023 professional growth conversations. And the focus, I've been told, is fostering learners' active participation and contribution. And that's across your designed and taught online lessons and in your asynchronous independent activities. I hope I've got that right, but it's a very worthwhile focus. So I'll propose a few ideas and I'll pose a few questions. I don't have all the answers to what is a very complex and nuanced challenge, but I have some experience and some thoughts to share. And I've got some provocations that I hope will set the scene for your work together today and going forward. So this is what I planned. We'll talk a little bit about the past as it informs our future, mā muri mā mua. Some ideas from practice, and some insights from research, including research of others, but some research that I've done with a wonderful team of colleagues in recent times, and then the provocations that I'm promising. So here's a little bit of history. As Rachel said, I've been teaching online for 21, 22 years now, and I'm a teacher at the University of Waikato. I teach in digital learning and teacher education. So I teach a lot of students who want to be primary school teachers or secondary school technology teachers. And I teach people who are teachers and who want to qualify with a master's or a doctorate, a PhD or an EdD degree. And most of the teaching I do is online, and it's what I really enjoy and am passionate about, as Rachel said. Prior to teaching online, I was a primary school teacher. And I started teaching at a school in Auckland in 1995. And I used to get the student monitors in my year 6 classroom to turn on the computers because I wasn't entirely sure how to do so. And then I'd let them play Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego on the bulky desktop machines that looked a lot like that one there with Windows 95, which would be what they were running at the time. Had a roster on the classroom wall for computer use. We had to because there were 36 students and one computer. And used to do things like what we called publishing writing, which actually involved using the computer as a glorified typewriter. There wasn't any internet in the classroom at the time. Then fast forward to 2000, and that little shot in the middle is a picture of my very first cell phone, which I loved. It was an Alcatel One Touch Easy. And at that time, I was working on the North Shore in Auckland in a school that was progressive and that ran a lot of Apple computers. It looked a lot like the one on the other side of the slide. I worked in or taught in a digital classroom. So it was a turn of the century version of what would be considered a modern and innovative learning environment now. It was an open plan classroom. Whenever the principal wanted there to be an extra room or office space, he'd just whack up a bit of jib at the weekend. But it was an open plan space, and there were 2 of us team teaching in there with 56 students aged, they were year 4 to 6, so aged 8 to 11. And we had 28 of those Apple iMac machines from the turn of the century era. So it was a ratio now of 1 computer to 2 students, which is a little bit better than the 1 to 36 that we started off with. In those days, we had the internet, but it was for teachers, not students. So we had it in the office and not the classroom at first. And software arrived in a box. So the students would use programs like HyperStudio and Kidspiration, Inspiration, and they made a lot of iMovies. What I learned was that I could spend an entire holiday period going through the manual that came with the box and learning everything I could about the software. And then I'd stand at the front of the class and try to teach the kids something about it. And they'd listen politely for the most part, and then would say, "Well, that's all very interesting, Miss Forbes, but let us show you 3 other ways to do exactly the same thing more efficiently." What I learned from that is that I needed to listen to them, and I needed to let them lead the learning, and that it was okay for me to learn from and with the students. It was probably the most powerful professional and personal learning that's ever happened to me, was learning to listen to students regardless of their age or stage of life. Once I started listening to students, I found that there was huge creative potential, particularly for video in the hands of students. And unfortunately, sometimes colleagues will get mired in the idea that video is something that we find and show to students, or that we produce for students. I have a lot of colleagues who lecture on video. In fact, the video worked so much better when the students made the videos. So they used to carry around these really bulky camcorders at the time and just produce lots and lots of footage. They used to video everything, and then they'd edit it and splice it together into iMovies with captions and music and so forth. So when they did speeches in class, they'd video them, and then they could sit alone privately in an office space and watch their speech back and set some goals to improve the way they were speaking. So it was a very good vehicle for formative assessment and self-assessment for speeches. I taught them how to debate because I loved debating as a teenager myself. And so I showed them how a formal debate works with an adjudicator and an affirmative team, a negative team, and the different roles of the speakers. And they then went on and made an iMovie showing the rest of the school how to debate. As well as that, they would always there'd be someone who would carry a video camera around for sports days and field trips. They'd video everything, and they made entries for the Fair Go Ad Awards and had lots of fun with that. Video was hugely creative in the students' hands, the potential of video. Some of the ideas from the past that resonate with me in terms of times when students were very actively involved and felt great about their learning and were participating and contributing especially well, were things like something that we did with absolutely no use of computers at all back in '95. We called it the money game, and I had read about it in SET, the research journal for teachers, SET. And these days, I guess you do it with Banker or a similar program. But basically, we created a class currency. We had, $1 and $2 bills back when denominations like that were actually in circulation. And the students designed the money, and then I just went and photocopied it and onto different colours of paper. I always remember proudly that the $1 bill one year had my face on it. I was very, very proud of that as well, another professional highlight. Now, what we did with this money is that I would pay them a weekly salary for coming to school, and they in turn would pay me a weekly rent for the use of their desks and other materials. There would be a police officer on duty at lunchtime who'd fine people for leaving rubbish behind. And there were various functions and jobs that could happen. On a Friday, we would alternate the tasks. One week, on a Friday, we would have a market day where all the kids made things or brought things from home to sell and set up a market on the desks around the classroom, and the others would spend their classroom money on that. Our classroom's name was Nico, so we used to call them Nico dollars. And on the alternate weeks when it wasn't a market day, instead we'd have an auction. So the students would again bring things or make things from home and would sell them at auction, and they got to practice being auctioneers. This worked especially well with year 4 to 6, which was the age group that I predominantly taught in during my time as a primary school teacher. What I used to do the day before payday was I used to get them to total up. They'd keep a running record, a sheet in the back of their maths books where they had to note everything that they earned and everything that they spent. And then on the day before payday, I'd charge them tax, because I was trying to catch them out, you see, hoping that it would be difficult for them to budget. And for some it was. If people forgot to make the entries in their maths books showing their income and expenditure, then I would make them employ an accountant who would be a peer who would help them. My reason for going into detail about this game is that I got a lot of feedback from parents saying that it was everything that the kids would talk about every night at home. The whole family would get involved. They'd be taking their money home and counting it at the dinner table. The students were engaged and they participated very actively, and they contributed to the point that each year when we'd play the game, something different would happen and it would go in a different direction. And more often than not, that direction was determined by the ideas that the children came up with. So I remember one year, and it would have been in the late 90s, when the casino was Sky City. This casino was being built in Auckland, and the children were actually quite excited about this casino for some reason. And so they asked whether they could have a casino for and as part of the money game. And I was a beginning teacher at the time, was feeling a little anxious about that, wasn't quite sure about the morality of it. So I went to my professional mentor, my deputy principal, and I said to her, what do you think about this casino that the boys in class, our year 6 boys, want to set up a casino in my classroom? What should I do? And she said, well, get them to write a proposal and get them in that proposal to explain what they're going to do with the casino, why they want one, put a rationale in there, and to explain what sorts of games they will play and how they'll ensure that those games are fairly run and that people get a chance to win. And so I thought, and she said, and when you ask them to do that, I mean, they're year 6 boys, they're not going to want to write anything. So that'll put them off and then it will go away. So I went to the boys and said, right, the deputy principal says that if you want to do this, you have to write this proposal. And they said, yeah, okay. And they went away and they came back the next day with 3 pages of very well written explanation about everything that we'd asked them to do. So the point of that really is that the students came to us with a suggestion and they said, this is what we want to do in an open-ended way. This is how we want to change the game that you've introduced us to. And we put some guidelines around it. We challenged them to write and to justify and to explain, and they did it. And in the final analysis, the casino was a resounding success. They used to run it on wet lunchtimes, and kids from other classes would come, and it got to the stage where everyone around the school had some of this money from our classroom. I was always very pleased with how well that game went, and I think that one of the lessons I've taken from that is the power of gamification in learning for really inspiring students and making them participate actively. And some of these ideas I've continued using through to the present day in online classes with university students. I left the primary school classroom and moved to Hamilton to teach at the University of Waikato in 2002. And at that time, I had never been a student in an online class. I completed my master's degree at the University of Auckland, and that involved commuting over the bridge once a week after school in order to sit in the classroom and learn in an evening class, and did all the assignments and things at home and drove to the library and so forth. So I'd never taken an online class. I had at the time, it's changed now, but I had at the time never been a student online. And I met this woman here, Nola Campbell, who was a pioneer of online learning and who'd been doing a type of online learning via email from the 1980s. She was a really early adopter and a very courageous and innovative teacher. And when I said I'd be quite interested in teaching online, she seized that as an opportunity to bring someone on board at a time when a lot of my colleagues were quite resistant to teaching online and didn't necessarily see it as on par with what they wanted to do in their lectures and tutorials on campus. I taught with Nola, and through our co-teaching, she would support me and she'd challenge me, and the balance between her support and her challenge was enormous, in that she would say, right, I'm going to show you how to do this, and next time we're going to do it together, and then it's all yours. So it was an apprenticeship, and it was about mentoring and about building my capacity as a learner and as a teacher. And that's been very influential for me as well too, because I think that I see my work with students as being parallel to that. Of course, it helps that these days some of the students I work with are going to be teachers. It's not the case that all of them are, but I'm building their capacity as learners and as professionals in whatever field they work in or intend to enter. If I had to distill Nola's influence down to a handful of key ideas, I would say that I learnt that the teacher doesn't have to know everything, which is really fortunate because I most certainly do not. I learnt that students are partners, and that listening and working with students, taking their suggestions seriously, is about conveying respect for students. I learned not to hog the decision making. I don't have to make all of the decisions and design absolutely everything in the classroom, whether it's online or face-to-face. Give students choices and let them make some decisions. And Nola always took a really creative approach. So she would do things like have role plays online. She would assign an assessment that involved writing poetry in an ICT class. And so some of you will be working with some pretty heavy constraints in terms of what you feel you can do, and assessment might be one of the constraints that you're facing. But while assessment can constrain us, our curriculum in Aotearoa New Zealand is very open, and pedagogy is even more open. So while NCEA might tell you what to teach because it's on the test, it won't tell you how to teach it. And that means that we can give students some choice and some control over how learning happens. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with a wonderful picture book by Dr. Seuss called Diff and Doofer Day, which is about a group of students who are taught in a way that's open and authentic and active, and they don't learn what's on the test. But of course, at the end of the book, they ace the test anyway. So unfortunately and sadly, Nola passed away in 2005, and I stepped up into a lot of the things that she had been teaching because she prepared me to do so. So this was me in 2005 with my 10-day-old son teaching online. I did take parental leave, but I couldn't quite leave the students all alone. So that was me checking into class when he was 10 days old. You can see from those curtains that, 2005 is not the recent future. And that boy is about to turn 19. So that's my other experience really with teaching and learning, was homeschooling him during the lockdown when he was a very disengaged 15-year-old tackling NCEA level 1. And now some of the students I work with at university do in fact enter their degrees when they're 17 years old. Some of them turn 18 in the first trimester at university, which I always find quite jarring, particularly when some of our teaching experience and their practicums are at a local middle school where some of the students they're teaching are 14. And it's very interesting to watch the dynamics when you have a 17 going on 18-year-old teaching a 14-year-old. I haven't had any other really powerful secondary schooling experience. I taught at primary school and I raised 2 sons, and now some of the students I teach are fairly young. But other than that, I've never taught in a secondary school. I haven't taught in an early childhood centre either, but I have been on a few trusts and boards of trustees with respect to those. And I think that an important point there is that there is so much that we can learn from early childhood education too, especially when it comes to harnessing what students are actually interested in and helping them to follow that path along. So here are some ideas from my practice. Firstly, student perspectives really matter. Whether the students are children or adults, listening to kids is really important. And sometimes, especially with teenagers, they're not necessarily all that forthcoming. So if we want to know what they like and what will engage them, we really have to ask them and ask them again and again. We have to consult with them. We have to listen carefully, and we have to negotiate with them, which was what the anecdote about the casino in the Year 6 classroom was. In my view, we need to do less teaching and more listening and co-learning. And that's one of the things that I take from my early childhood education colleagues. Students' perspectives and students' voices, their ideas, their points of critique and their needs and their identities are all really important, and they're also very diverse. Students are not a homogenous group, as I'm sure you'll all know. There is a powerful theoretical framework called Universal Design for Learning that you might be familiar with, and that posits that we need to give students lots of variety and choice. Universal Design for Learning has 3 main principles. One is multiple means of engagement. There are different ways that students can engage. Multiple means of representing. When we have some content that we need to share, we need to do it in a variety of ways. And also giving the students multiple means of acting and expressing and demonstrating their knowledge. And I think when we realise that students aren't all the same, we also need to realise that that means that active participation is a bit quieter for some than it is for others. Sometimes you may think a student's not participating because they don't join in the online discussion as much, or they don't like to talk in front of a larger group. But that student may be very actively engaged in their actions when they get offline and start doing things away from the classroom. And so finding out about that is a challenge for us, which has always led me to wonder why sometimes when we're thinking about online learning, we get stuck on the idea that all the learning has to happen online. A lot of online learning is about bringing the students back to share what they've been doing offline. And they could be learning in their homes, in their communities, anywhere, and then bringing that back in. And I know that in recent years, when the University of Waikato, among other universities, redesigned their curriculum framework, one of the things they did was to insist on an aspect of work integrated learning in the final year of every undergraduate degree. So newsflash for those of us who are teachers who have always known that if you want to learn to do anything, you have to get out into the field and actually practice and apprentice yourself to people who are doing it. So us teachers have always practiced in schools right from the very first years of university, but now the whole university is doing it. So students who work in computer science are going out and interning at companies. Students who work in hospitality are going out and working in the field and doing voluntary work that has a purpose. I subscribe to a newsletter called Volunteer Waikato, and it comes through my email, and when I have time, I read it and I dream about what it would be like to have time and space in my life to do voluntary work. And I think about the positions and how great they would be for some of the students I work with, so that they could give back to the community, that their active participation and their contribution could have a cause and a purpose for authentic learning, so that they get to do something. I'll finish up with some insights from research. How am I going for time, Rachel?
Hang on. You got plenty of time.
Okay.
10:34.
Cool. Insights from research. During COVID and subsequent to the lockdown periods, I've been involved with a team of researchers, which has been a very, very exciting collaboration. We have investigated the experiences of university students across all 8 New Zealand universities when they were learning online during COVID. And while our research and our data collection occurred during and immediately after the lockdown periods of COVID, we've been able to draw lessons from our data that are about remote learning and how to make it active, and sustainable strategies for teaching and learning online. So I can show you where some of those publications are. There's been 4 articles that have come out this year from our team, and I know that at least a couple of them are open access, so anyone can get them. But if you have trouble accessing them, I'm going to share my email at the end as well. So I thought I'd just talk about, to close, some of the things that has come out of that research that could have wider application. So one of the articles that I'm drawing from is I'm the first author of, and we posed the question, can remote learning be active, authentic, and real? And I think that you know, and I know, that yes, it can. Remote learning, online learning can be active, authentic, and real. But I think that we also know that the reality doesn't always match the rhetoric, and that sometimes there's a gap between the affordances or the potential and the daily grind. There are times where teaching and learning, being in class, can seem stale and can seem less alive. Students have told us, and it is well known across the research literature, that peer interaction is a key element when it comes to them being actively engaged and participating and contributing, and that their learning can happen, as I said, online and in their home and community contexts offline as well. During our research, one of the powerful examples I read about from someone else's work was in Australia, where a group of authors led by Van Heften in 2021, when the country was in lockdown, they wanted students to be able to participate in practical science activities. So they set up a citizen science activity. And so what they did was they called them the Grass Gazers Citizen Science Project, and they involved students in interactive science learning activities where the students would go out into their neighbourhoods and would observe botanical data of the grasses around the neighbourhood. They would track the grass species and collect specimens, and they would add data and photos to a database that was shared, and they could view each other's entries online. And through that project, the students got out of their homes and they were allowed to move around the neighbourhood to do this. And they were exposed to real life scientific research and authentic learning, and where they were contributing data to a proper project. And apparently the students and their friends and their families all got involved, and it raised awareness of the benefits of citizen science and of the importance of grass diversity and the public health implications. And I thought that was a really powerful example of how active participation and contribution can be more than contributing to a discussion, for example. Some of the other things we picked up on are And this relates to some other research I've done in the past, where a lot of my online classes will involve a form of asynchronous online discussion. So the students will be compelled to contribute to a forum. We use Moodle, so they'll be in a Moodle forum and they're told that they have to discuss particular scenarios or stimuli, and that they have to contribute actively to that. And of course, some of them don't want to do that. It doesn't necessarily come easily at all. And so something that we've learned along the way is that it really helps if you set up some sort of a social contract with students, where you help them to realize why they need to contribute and what's in it for them, and also what's in it for the other people, for the community. So we have 3 layers of rationale for this is why you need to contribute in class. And the first one is it's good for your learning. Being actively engaged will help you to learn. The second layer is it's actually good for the class. If no one contributes, there is no discussion. And then how can we learn from each other? And when you need to contribute so that you are helping your peers to learn, because that is an important role in our classroom community. And the third rationale is that contributing to the discussion builds skills that will be needed for professional conversations in their chosen professions going forward. So I've run some experiments with that social contract, where I'll often start with a set of guidelines and we'll say to the students, okay, now tear these apart and tell me what you like about them and what you don't. And so the students will contribute ideas, particularly about what other students, what their peers do in discussion that they don't like. And so they will suggest, really hate it in discussion when I'm in there and someone's written a post that answers all the questions and gives all the information and it dries the whole thing up and I've got something to say. So I've got nothing to say. So we write a set of guidelines that builds that in and says, please don't crowd the conversation and steal everyone else's thunder. Keep your contributions short or others won't read them. Those kinds of things. And so together, the students will write the rules for engagement. They will write the guidelines as a form of social contract. And then we'll work with those and we'll see how they go. And at the end of the class, we'll evaluate them again and make further changes, and then gift that social contract to the next class to start with as a white paper. And they'll work through the same process iteratively, where they pull the rules apart and things change and morph, and they come up with something different to pass on to the next class, and it simply never ends. The power of video has remained since the year 4 to 6 students used to make iMovies about everything. I still find that the best videos and the best websites are those that are designed by the students in class, and our research showed that video was incredibly beneficial for students when they were locked down and trying to learn online. While they enjoyed videos that were produced for them, with some good stories about drone footage that had been taken and was used in lieu of going on a field trip. They also did well when they videoed themselves practicing a particular skill. And so in one of the articles, we write about a medical student we'd interviewed who needed to learn some spinal techniques. And she said she borrowed a spine. And then she said, oh, not a real one. I borrowed a spine and took it home and was able to practice on my husband and my child and the spine, and then could video what she was doing and send that into her lecturer. Finally, there's one theory that really resonates with us, and we talk about it again in one of the articles that we published this year, and I'll show that to you, which is self-determination theory. So this isn't our theory, it's Ryan and Desi's theory, and it's not new either. It's been around for many years. But what this theory says, and this really does resonate with me as a professional and as a learner too, is that what motivates people? People are most motivated when these 3 things are in place. And if we can work with these 3 aspects for ourselves and for the students we work with, then motivation will happen. The first thing is autonomy, which brings us back to the whole point about having choice, having control, having goals. Autonomy is part of motivation. Second part of motivation is belonging, feeling that we're an important part of something bigger than us, whether that's a citizen science project or whether that's a class community. Having good relationships and plenty of interaction and feeling that we have a space, that we belong. And the third thing is competence, feeling like we're doing a good job. You know how it is sometimes when you get so busy that you're pulled in different directions and you feel like you're not doing anything well. That can be incredibly demotivating, and it is for our students as well. So feeling a sense of competence, even as we're learning. And that comes from helping students to understand where to get help and to understand that seeking help with their learning and admitting when they don't understand is a healthy, productive thing to do and very, very positive. And the feedback that we give our students all the time is also how we build that sense of competence, even when the competence comes from progress, when the learning needs are still very apparent. So in conclusion, I'd say that active learning, what is it? And what is it not? Active learning is not passive by definition. It's not unidirectional transmission like what I've been doing so far. And it's not teacher-centric. It's not all about us. We shouldn't be doing all the work, which is good news. Active learning has a future orientation. It requires forward thinking, planning ahead and goal setting, and not just from us, by our students. And it involves readjusting and evaluating. Active learning is participatory and engaging, and it's very often collaborative and interactive. It's not quiet for most students. So if we're teaching in a way that isn't active, we can check. Is my teaching encouraging the students to be passive? Is it all going in one direction? Is it teacher-centric? Is it about me? Am I the sage on the stage? And is it short-term focused where the likes of assessment has priority? So here are the provocations. I would invite you to think about a time when your learners, the students that you work with, were most actively engaged. And perhaps too, what is the single most challenging constraint to that engagement? What gets in the way of students being actively engaged? When you're planning in any task, where is the activity and who's leading it? Who decides what to do, when to do it, and how to do it? How could the students that we work with have more voice and choice and more agency, more autonomy? How could the learning be more authentic and more real and relevant to the students' lives? Where is the purpose and the meaning for the students and for other people who matter to the students? Who's doing the talking? Who's doing the listening? Who's making the decisions? And who's doing all of the work? And if it's us, maybe we're doing it wrong. So, looks like I've missed my final slide, but what I had on my final slide, well, there we go, good. This is the publications that I have mentioned. So that's, if you Google Dianne Forbes Waikato, this comes up, it does for me at least. And the publications are all on this tab. And a lot of these are open access, which means you don't have to be affiliated to a university that subscribes to the journals to read them. They are publicly available, as research should be when it's paid for by the taxpayers. So a lot of what I've talked about today has come from this one here, from distance education, practical learning in hybrid environments, where we pose that question, can remote learning be active, authentic and real? And if you click on that, you'll go straight to that. And this one here, just come out recently, is called Sustainable Strategies for Teaching and Learning Online. And while that research has been in a university context, one thing that I have learned through my experience as a primary school teacher through to a tertiary teacher is that there's really more similarities than differences between kids and adults when it comes to learning. So the slide also has my email address, and I would invite you to keep in touch. I'd love to hear from any of you at any point. I'm interested in collaborating on research. I'm interested in teaching collaborations. I once had a really great activity in an online class with first-year teacher education students, where I got a group of 12-year-olds to join us online, and they schooled the school teachers about what they expected and what they needed. And so that was a great activity if you ever want to do something like that. And I'm also always on the lookout for new students myself. So if you're thinking about a master's degree or a doctorate, EdD, PhD, I'm totally fine with working from a distance. You do not have to move to Hamilton, and that's the good news. So, kia ora tātou.